Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the garage. As it turns out, I am entering my Let's Rank Anything that has anything to do with this year's Academy Awards era. What is up, fam? Welcome back to the garage. Gerald here with you. It is time to do some rankings now that we have the nominees for the 97th Annual Academy Awards. There were some surprises, shall we say. There were also some to-be-expected nominations. Some huge surprises. Brazil's I'm Still Here into the 10 for Best Picture.
I'm Still Here. Nominees to be determined.
Guys, paperwork. Let's go.
Man, I love that. Also a big surprise, or a little bit less of a shock, but still a surprise. Monica Barbaro getting in for supporting actress for A Complete Unknown. We also had some traditional snubs this year. I hate using the word snub because basically anybody in Hollywood that did not get nominated this year was technically a snub. But Edward Berger was left off of the 5 for Best Director for his work on Conclave. Speaking of supporting, some people may leave Jamie Lee Curtis or even Anjanou Ellis-Taylor as snubs in Best Supporting Actress. And then in Supporting Actor, Clarence Macklin, who I was pulling for all season for Sing Sing, did not make the final 5 as that spot went to most likely Jeremy Strong for The Apprentice. Also, Daniel Craig missed in Best Actor. Went to Sebastian Stan. Good for him, but man, Daniel Craig. All in all, I think we got a good group of nominees this year for the Academy Awards. A lot of my predictions were spot on, so nothing too shocking except for the few that I just mentioned to you here. Every year I like to go through and give you my personal rankings for what ultimately ended up getting nominated in the major categories. I will do another one of these videos at the end of this week or early next week for lead acting performances. I will group Best Actor and Best Actress together, those 10 performances, and I will rank them. Nominees this year was. And I'll do the same thing for Supporting Actor and Actress. Last year I did not do one for Director, but then you guys were kind of vocal that you wanted the Director 5. So maybe I'll do a top 5 for what got nominated for Best Director this year also. But we're going to start things out with my rankings 10-1 for the Best Picture nominees this year. By the way, stay tuned because at the end of this video, I'm going to premiere and debut my power rankings for Best Picture. This is something I will do throughout the season leading up to the Academy Awards on March 2nd. I will give you the rankings 10-1, what I think stands the most likelihood to walk away with that trophy. And this is my initial power ranking. I'll give that to you briefly at the end of my personal rankings. Again, guys, these are just my opinion, the one I'm about to give you. It is just my personal enjoyment of the 10 films that got nominated. And quite frankly, there's about 5 or 6 films in this 10 that I loved, that were among my personal favorites of the year. So that never happens. The majority of the nominees, over half of them, are movies that I love, that I'm going to own, that I'm going to rewatch frequently, that I'm going to suggest to friends and family. So actually, it's a great group this year. So with that being said, let's start with my number 10. The movie I'm going to throw at number 10 for Best Picture, and the only reason that I would ever put this movie in a top 10 ever is because I don't have a choice, and it was nominated this year. I look back at my Letterboxd. I watched 158 new films in 2024. I ranked this one 138 out of 158. It's in the bottom 20 films I saw last year, and it's my number 10 among the nominees, and that is Jacques Audiard's Emilia Perez. Look, I've been called a hater online by people that for some reason love this movie. There's bits and pieces of the film that I do appreciate. Most notably, it's rooted in the performances in the movie, especially Zoe Saldana. I think she gives a tremendous acting effort here, and she's probably going to sweep Supporting Actress, although she will get some competition this season from Ariana Grande. But as we're sitting here right now, I think she's pretty much a winner in that category, and well-deserved. The only problem is she's a lead actress in this movie, being campaigned as supporting, but that's showing up all over the place. Technically, Ariana is a co-lead in Wicked as well. I'm over kind of getting mad at the Academy for category fraud because it happens every single year, usually in multiple categories. The movie just didn't hit with me. We recorded an episode about it on my podcast when the film first came out, and it just falls flat. There's very little emotion in Emilia Perez. And not only that, the different groups that have an opportunity to be represented in this film while they are represented, and I do note that it is important that certain groups are represented in the film, particularly those in the trans community, as Carla Sofia Gasson was the first out trans person to receive a major Academy Award nomination, and I think that is huge. But look, Ayoudard is a lauded French filmmaker who made a Spanish story centered around people of that heritage. He's admitted that it is a culture that he is not extremely knowledgeable about. I'm also not extremely knowledgeable about it, but I have seen the critiques from people that are, and it kind of solidified my main gripes with the film, is I don't know what the message is intended to be. Because if you're looking at a way to spotlight the trans community, the story surrounding Emilia Perez, the titular character in this film, I think does not do that community and that trans person in particular justice. It is a very problematic arc to that character's story, where as Benitez, he was a criminal, a drug lord, a very, very bad, immoral person. And in order to escape that life, he wanted to transition to female. It's lightly noted that it was because, like most trans people, he wanted to come out to be who they really were. In this case, a female, a woman. However, as the film continues past that transition point, it acts as if the female character is more of a disguise for Benitez to escape his previous criminal life, not to live in the skin that they belong in. I just find that kind of icky. Peeling away kind of the political aspect or the social commentary that I've been talking about, Emilia Perez is just not a fun movie. It's a musical that's almost barren of music. There's a couple really good numbers in the film, particularly El Mal. I really like that song. I think it's a straight up banger. Mi Camino is also a great tune. These are the two songs that have been getting notoriety on the award circuit, and one of the two of those is probably going to win Best Song this year. However, 2 out of about 20 songs is not a good track record. Emilia Perez just doesn't pack that emotional punch. It also doesn't really tell me what I'm supposed to take away from it from a social commentary perspective, and it's just a downer of a watch. When we get to the last act of the film, it is like a literal car wreck, no pun intended, that you can't look away from. I just was baffled when the movie ended. I gave it a 4 out of 10 on our podcast when we reviewed it, but when I started to see it gain traction this award season, I was just flabbergasted by it. I've heard people in the industry that I love, that I've owned several movies with them in it or them having directed it, and they love it. It was their favorite movie of 2024. If this movie were to go on to win Best Picture, it would be one of my least favorite wins in that category, if not my least favorite. And I'm talking about over movies like even Crash, which I thought was a horrendous win of some of the movies that it was up against that year. But I have come to the realization, and I have grasped the fact that the industry, which would include the Academy, which has a strong international base right now, loves this movie. It got 13 nominations this past week at the nominations announcement, and I think it's going to win some as well. It could actually be your front runner for Best Picture of the Year. Remember, those power rankings are coming up at the end of this video. I just got a little sad talking about that. In my personal rankings, this is not anywhere close to a movie that I'm going to put anywhere other than number 10. Frankly, I wish I didn't even have to put it on this list. I'm so sorry, Emilia Perez stands, but I do not like this film. Coming in at my number 9 is going to be the other musical that got nominated for Best Picture, John M. Chu's Wicked, Part 1. Part 1. I'm going to put it in there even if nobody at the production studio does. Now, the bad news is I had Emilia Perez on this list. I didn't have a choice, right? The good news is, of the other 9 films remaining, and the other 9 that got nominated for Best Picture this year, I truly do love all these films. There's a couple, this one at number 9 and number 8, that I'm kind of like middling on, but I did really enjoy them. But these are all really good films that I would recommend that you check out when you're going through your Best Picture watches before the Oscars if you haven't seen them. Wicked is obviously the adaptation of a hugely popular, no pun intended, Broadway musical of the same name. I've actually seen the musical on stage 3 times prior to the movie even getting greenlit. and I love the musical. So when I heard that they were doing a film version of it, I was cautiously optimistic. And the reason I say that is because, like I discussed on our podcast when we also covered this movie, I don't tend to like the translation from a original stage production to a screen adaptation. It rarely works for me. It has worked in a couple instances when you think of movies like Hairspray or Rocky Horror Picture Show, for example. It does work on occasion. More often than not, it misses for me personally in terms of my level of enjoyment, because rarely do they live up to my hype. However, Wicked was on par. Still not as good as the stage musical, in my opinion. However, the source material, it was held true to that. And it was really the musical in a film format. Now, there's some things about the film format that I didn't love, which would be kind of taking away from the elaborate production design that I wish had had a little more opportunity to shine in this movie and not been drowned out by a weird color palette that I've equated to Rainbow Bright and My Little Pony having a baby. But the movie itself and the story is true to the musical, therefore I did like the story. The performances are the number one reason why this movie was a home run for me personally, particularly Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba and absolutely Ariana Grande as Glinda in this movie, or Galinda. The two of them as a tandem, as a duo, are right up there with the best duos in cinema this year, frankly. And their budding relationship and friendship and how complicated it is and how loving it kind of becomes. And then when we get to part two, if you've seen the musical, you know how kind of it turns back into a complication all over again. And we begin to see the kind of seesawing battle between good and evil. Of course, Glinda representing good and Elpha representing evil, or wicked in this case. Nonetheless, the performances are phenomenal. The songs are just as good as they are in the stage production. Defying Gravity is an absolute showstopper, and it is in this movie as well, which is our finale. I'll also go ahead and tell you, I'm not trying to be a hater, I promise, but there is no reason that a part one of what is an entire musical at 3 hours, there's no reason why a part one should have also been 3 hours. And we haven't even told part two yet. I am on a soapbox about that, John Chu. Let's edit this thing down. Let's get it to maybe a little over 2. I mean, part two has a lot on its shoulders now in terms of expectation because of how long and how much material was already put into part one. And I've heard they're writing more original songs for part two. That's probably, honestly, to elongate it a little bit. I don't know. We'll see how this one performs at this year's Oscars, because I think that could tell us a lot about part two, or I'm sorry, For Good, when it comes to next year's Oscars. There's some things, obviously, I have problems with it, but I like this movie. If you love the musical, you're going to dig the film. It's my number 9. Coming in at my number 8 is another surprise, a pleasant surprise that we got on Oscars nominations day. It was only number 2 of 2 nominations total. It also got nominated for screenplay, which was a pleasant surprise, but I'm talking about Ramel Ross's Nickel Boys. This is a film much like Wicked that I do have reservations about on the whole, but as an entirety, I really enjoyed this film as well. The number one thing that I like about this film and why I would suggest it to folks is because of the unique and strange vision that Ramel Ross had for the film and for adapting it here. And it's shot in a way that is frankly like nothing I've ever seen from a Hollywood production. Revolutionary style of POV, the way the film is told in that first-person point of view, and how the camera is essentially the main character of every scene. And we, as the audience, are that person, because obviously the camera is showing us what we see. So we are reactionary in that way to where everybody else in the scene, or everything else in the scene, is reacting to us through that lens. So it is a brilliantly executed kind of flip it on its head mentality from what our commonplace contrivances are, at least in America, when it comes to watching movies. We have to shred away what our movie watching expectations are in order to enjoy a film like Nickel Boys. Now, while I did enjoy the film for the craft, because of the level of craft in this film and the extent that Ross and team went to here, it was a bit harder for me personally to connect to the narrative in the film. And this is a story that frankly should be very moving and very emotional and very hard to watch at times, frankly, based on the subject matter about these boys who are dealing with not only racism in the time, but abuse, and there's some hard things that they go through that they have to reckon with their future selves in the film. So it's tough material. It's a dense, tough material. But again, I think it's great. If it had been shot traditionally, I think a movie like Sleepers, for example, from the 90s, if it had been shot traditionally, I would have most likely been in tears watching this movie, and it would have been easier for me personally as an audience member to connect to some of the quote-unquote victims in this film and what they're going through. But because I was so in awe by the way these scenes were shot, I just found myself, it took me a while to get back to, what's Elwood going through? How, of course he feels that way. And again, it's my fault. It's not the movie's fault. It's not Ramel Ross's fault. It's definitely not the actor's fault. I just want to rewatch Nickel Boys, and I've mentioned that on my podcast before as well. I can't wait to rewatch this one because I also didn't know about the kind of extreme camera tactics when I sat down to watch the film, because I had a screener for it and I watched it at home, and I had read virtually nothing about it except that it was in the awards discussion. So I knew it was a contender. I knew I needed to check it out. So it did kind of blindside me, and it kind of, got me a little wobbly initially. And again, I never really was able to steer back to connecting with the characters in the film, which is why I'm excited to give this one a second watch. But as we're sitting here, out of the 10 movies nominated, it would be my personal number 8. We're talking about the craft of filmmaking. My number 7 is right up there with Emilia Perez in terms of being the front runner to walk away with the Academy Award for Best Picture. And I'm talking about The Brutalist, directed by Brady Corbet. This is a film that runs 3.5 hours with an intermission, a built-in 15-minute intermission. Anybody that knows me personally knows that you're already off on the wrong foot. Traditionally speaking, and I'm going to sound like a snob, and I apologize, I hate 3-hour plus movies. Really, I hate any movie that goes over like 2.5 hours, traditionally. But then every once in a while, filmmakers like Cameron or Scorsese, or in this case, Corbet, will deliver a product that, while I'm watching it, help me forget the length of the film. In fact, the only thing that really made that light bulb go off for me while I was watching it was the intermission, because I go, oh, wait a minute, how long has it been on? And I started checking my phone and whatever until the intermission was over. But this is a film that also has the highest level of craft, much like I was talking about with Nickel Boys. Corbet used the Vista Vision technology that I don't think has even been used in a Hollywood production in over 20 years. The score is phenomenal. The cinematography, literally thinking about it now, blows me away. And their performances, most notably Adrian Brody, who is one of the frontrunners for Best Actor, but also Guy Pearce turning in the best work of his career, in my opinion, and also a very stout performance turned in here from Felicity Jones, who also received an Oscar nomination this year. So The Brutalist getting 10 nominations is a lot. It's also nominated for Best Picture and Director. I think Corbet is most likely your best director this year, regardless if the film wins Picture or not. This is the great American story. It's a retelling of essentially the American dream from an immigrant's point of view. In this case, a Hungarian man who was a world-renowned architect and, frankly, artist in Hungary prior to the Holocaust. Having survived after the Holocaust, he immigrates to America in the 1950s. And it's just fascinating what Brody does in this film as Laszlo in essentially showing us what it must feel like to go from one of the most key figures in your own society in another country to when you immigrate to America, you're nothing. You're literally a homeless person begging for food on the streets. I mean, you have family that you can lean on here to kind of get you started. But at the end of the day, you've gone from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the sewer. I think of some of the same analogies that were used in a movie like Parasite in 2018. And it just shows that mirror of how different your life can change. And a lot of times it can be because of the world around us and not, anything by our own doing or choosing. And I think that's what Laszlo is really going through in this film. So this is a roller coaster ride for him, for Adrian Brody. If you follow his character, if you connect to his story, and frankly, you would connect to that American dream that millions of immigrants had in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and even really still up until today, and why they want to come to this country and why it's considered the greatest country in the world. And, this is why, there's sweeping epics in cinema that come along every 10 or 15 years that are on the Godfather level of the American dream and the American cinematic story of what it's like to come here and to see that. The Statue of Liberty in this film is a very prominent image because of that reason. Getting off of the boat and seeing that for the first time after you had been surrounded by death and misery for probably a decade for his character before he gets here. It's a impactful thing to experience. Now, would it have been more impactful had it been 2 hours? I don't know. And again, I know I sound like a snob. It's a good movie. I'm not saying it's not a good movie. And if anything, I'm commending the fact that a nearly 3.5-hour movie felt like a couple hours to me, because I'm very critical of runtimes in films. But I think that the story, how epic it was, how grandiose it was, and these performances that really helped lift that story up, I think it is one of the better films of the year, despite its runtime. For me, I really, really enjoyed it. I would recommend everybody check it out, especially if you're able to see it on a theater screen, because the cinematography, production design, and other things that went into this film from a craft perspective are literally flawless, and I would expect them to rack up some bottom-of-the-line awards as well come Oscars night. But on my personal rankings, The Brutalist falls at number 7. Another film that I've seen kind of explained as Gossip Girl in the Vatican would be Edward Berger's Conclave, and that would be my personal number 6. Look, this film is so engrossing to be, frankly, such a boring premise. The film is not trying to do anything other than show you the process of the conclave, which is essentially the election or the process of selecting a new pope once the previous one passes away, in this case. The voting for the new pope, which, I mean, I knew what a conclave was, with the smoke and all that, when a new pope is, I knew about all that vaguely, but I'm not Catholic. I never really studied it in school, per se, so I wasn't, honed in on the experience of a conclave and selecting the pope. But what I was going to say is what's kind of ironic and funny about it, and maybe Berger had a little bit of a sense of humor here, even though I know it's an adapted screenplay, but it mirrors the Academy's voting system for Best Picture. It's essentially you rank your number ones, and if enough people, or if one person gets enough number ones, over 50 or 60% or whatever it is, then they're the Pope. If not, those other votes get redistributed and we start all over again, and then they count up the ones again. And essentially you're going on and on and on and on, re-ranking them until you eventually, redistributing all the 2 downs until you eventually have a number 1, and that's your Pope. And guess what? That's what the Academy does with Best Picture, with this preferential ballots and ranked voting, top-down voting. They'll rank all these movies 1 to 10. If one of the films doesn't have over 50% of people selecting it as number 1, they're going to redistribute. They're going to do it again. They're going to keep going until they get a Best Picture winner. So it is kind of funny in that way. I think Edward Berger being snubbed and missing out on Best Director really hurts Conclave's chances at a Best Picture win, which frankly kind of sucks, because I think Conclave, if it had the strength, along with The Brutalist, would be Emilia Perez's biggest competition, because if it had director, and obviously it has picture here, performances with Ray Fiennes, Isabella Rossellini, and a lot of bottom-of-the-line categories. It also got, I think, 8 nominations, maybe even more. So the Academy really, really likes it, but they didn't like it enough to nominate Edward Berger, which is super, super strange to me, especially considering they did the same thing to him a couple years ago with All Quiet on the Western Front, which received a ton of nominations, including Best Picture, and no Best Director nomination. Here we are again. But Conclave is essentially like a courtroom power play drama with some funny kind of under the surface commentary built in. These popes are snappy. They're kind of diva to each other, and it's kind of hilarious in that way. There's that one image of all the popes in their full garb outside the Vatican vaping. I mean, that kind of shit is priceless. I don't know if that really happens at the Vatican, but that image is one of my favorite of the whole year, so thank you, Edward Berger, for that. Ray Fiennes and Stanley Tucci in particular turn in phenomenal performances in this movie. Isabella Rossellini is also very, very good, obviously getting a supporting actress nod this year. I've been vocal about the fact that I think, she's only in it like 7 minutes, and she has very little dialogue. There's a couple scenes where she doesn't even speak in the movie. Not saying that you have to speak to, act well, because she does great. She's a legend. I mean, she's a legend. This is a great performance. I just wonder if there were some other supporting roles that were a little more meaty, a little more hefty, and a little more pivotal to the narratives in their film. I'm thinking of Margaret Qualley, specifically, Academy. But nonetheless, Conclave is an enjoyable picture, and the kind of final act swing in this movie, I guess frankly could be called a plot twist out of nowhere, was a little jarring, and it felt a little forced. Like, did we really need to do that major crazy kind of plot beat? I don't know that we did to still get the point across, but nonetheless, it did its job. It was an intriguing look into a world that the public never gets to see. And it was filmed beautifully, and because it is such a mysterious event, you're enraptured by it if you have any level of interest in it at all. Conclave is another one that I'm really excited to rewatch. It would be my personal number 6. My number 5, I'm ranking these on my personal enjoyment. People are going to bash me. I'm not saying this is the 5th best movie. I'm not saying Emilia Perez is the 10th worst movie. Actually, I am saying that. But what I'm saying is, of the 10 nominated, if I had to pick which ones to rewatch right this second, this would be the 5th movie I would pick, essentially. Number 1 would be the first I would pick, and so on. My number 5 is James Mangold's A Complete Unknown, You're G.D. Right. Now look, I'm like that Academy member that loves music biopics. Maybe too much. You know what? I kind of liked Bohemian Rhapsody. I don't think it's your best actor winner for Rami Malek. I did not think that. I did not think it was a best picture worthy nominee. And I definitely did not think, as an editor, that it was one of the best edited films of the year. But nonetheless, it got a shit ton of nominations because the Academy eats these films up. And why I'm so excited that they ate up A Complete Unknown this year is because, yes, it's a music biopic about Bob Dylan, and a little bit like Joan Baez as well. And essentially it's about Dylan's impact in the folk music scene in the early 60s, particularly in New York and that part of the country. But Mangold holds back from the traditional music biopic tropes. Now, some of the tropes exist, and I don't think you'll escape that in any biopic. And if you're telling yourself you don't like those tropes, then you may as well stop watching music biopics. And by that I mean, of course you're going to have live performances. Of course you're going to have audience members or record producers or wives or whatever reacting to the camera for what they feel, seeing this person do this for the first time. And you might think that's played out because it's in all of them, but at the same time, it is such an important component to tell the story, in my opinion. Because think of what it must have been like to see or hear Bob Dylan write or perform like a Rolling Stone for the first time. Now, if he performs that in the movie, which he does, and you don't show us what those people felt when they saw it, I feel like you're missing something. And you can, fill in the blank for anything in these music biopics. The same thing could be said in Bohemian Rhapsody. If we don't see that audience reaction to him performing the song Bohemian Rhapsody or writing it on the piano, then what are we doing? Like, of course, that has to be a component in those films. But with the exception of the live performances that Dylan gives and Joan Baez gives, and those kind of reactionary moments from the rest of the cast and the extras, this is a pretty non-conventional music biopic because it doesn't really tell you anything about the lore of the main character. The main focus is Bob Dylan, but you don't leave this movie knowing anything else about him. The only thing you leave the film knowing, if you didn't already know going into it, is his impact in the folk music scene and in various folk festivals in the early 1960s, and how he eventually transitioned to electric guitars and electric instruments, which is not something folk musicians did at the time, and how that was seen as revolutionary, yes, but also a bit taboo in the folk music industry. You know, A Complete Unknown is based on a book that very specifically covers about a 4 to 5 year period in Dylan's career. There was a ton of shit that happened before this. There was obviously a lot of stuff that happened after because the dude's still alive and still active. But James Mangold is not interested in telling you about his childhood or his relationship to his parents or having flashbacks to him writing a song because of something he went through in a past relationship. None of those tropes or conventions exist in The Complete Unknown. The reason I love it is because it is literally a snapshot of a 4 to 5 year period in this icon's journey his journey to become an icon, which of course now he is in the world. And I think that's awesome. I love it. I didn't need anything more from that. And the performance that Timothée Chalamet gives in this movie, Brody may win the Oscar, but I'm sticking with Timmy. Like, you'll see. Unless Brody continues to sweep, Critics' Choice, SAG, etc., Timmy's got an in if Brody doesn't sweep, because his performance is truly something to behold. I'm not saying Brody's isn't, but Timmy learned how to play harmonica, guitar. Bob Dylan is not a character that you can capture in a couple weeks. I mean, the guy worked on it for 6 years, and now he's out there on the tour, on the press tour, spreading the gospel of Dylan. He's performed on SNL this past weekend, basically as Dylan, as the musical guest. I love it. A Complete Unknown, from my personal enjoyment level, is, even though it's number 5 on this list, it's probably number 2 or 3 as far as the one I'm going to probably rewatch the most. Is the most palatable, in my opinion, from what my tastes are personally. It's my number 5 out of the Best Picture nominees. All right, now we're getting into some movies that I love. So, this is crazy to me, but the top 4 that I'm about to give you, the remaining 4 films that I'm going to rank here that were also nominated for Best Picture, are in my personal top 12 of the year. Personally, before having anything to do with the award season. When I saw them and began to rank my 2024, this movie that I'm giving you number 4 ended up as my number 12 of the year. The other 3 are in my top 7. I mean, that's crazy to me. That's how I know this was a good year for film for me personally, because so many films that I loved are here in the Best Picture race. My number 4 among the nominees is the Brazilian film, I'm Still Here. I'm actually working on a second video that I hope to have out this week as well that talks about I'm Still Here. It's basically a review of the film and also discussing, frankly, how did this movie get nominated for Best Picture? Because it defied all logic. It received literally no precursors for the film leading up to its nomination. Fernanda Torres was nominated for the Globe and eventually won that. So I thought she was a pretty definite shoo-in for an actress nomination, which thankfully she got. But even me, who obviously loves this film, did not have it anywhere near my Best Picture predictions. So it is easily the craziest and the most shocking of the nominations that were dropped last week. But it's also one of the ones that I am most excited about. I was talking earlier about the emotionality and how I didn't really connect to the emotional story in a movie like Nickel Boys. Well, and I'm Still Here, it's the opposite. And again, I'm working on a separate video where I break down my take on the film, but generally just to wrap it up for you and why I love it so much, I did connect to it. This movie, Walter Salles, the director, does a great job at showing you the kind of intricacies and the mundane, everyday kind of lives of a normal family. Now, of course, this is in Brazil, not America. If this had been an American family, you know, you think of a movie like American Beauty by Sam Mendes, just kind of capturing those like normal, what it's like just to have a family that you love, yes, and multiple siblings, etc. But you're just existing. You're just a family. You're just together. You're just doing what you guys do. There was a heavy political climate at the time in Brazil, and the Brazilian dictatorship basically took over. And at a time in the 1960s, and because of that, the father, the patriarch of the family, goes missing, is essentially taken. I won't give it away, but his character is basically gone. And Fernanda Torres' character, as the mother of the family, is left as a single mom. And essentially it becomes a story of survival at that point. And when I say survival, I mean how do you hold your family together in these tumultuous political times, but also in just these times of unthinkable, unimaginable tragedy and emotion for your family personally. I think it's also a bit important in our current climate. And I don't want to get political in this video, but I will just say I do see parallels to I'm Still Here and to what's happening in a lot of countries. And I'm not excluding America from that with our new president recently being sworn in. It's an important movie. And you look at branches of the Academy and you look at like documentary, documentary is always going to have 2 or 3 like important films in there. And they do this year too with a movie like No Other Land, for example. But you don't always look to Best Picture or even the performances that end up getting nominated as like, man, that's important. I hope people see that because of the value in the kind of story and how it really reaches across all nationalities, all cultures. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really connected to this film. I hope you guys tune in a few days when I'm able to put out my full review and breakdown of I'm Still Here. The movie just opened, at least in my city, this past Friday, just a few days ago as I'm recording. So I know it did get a release at some cities across the country, probably because of the Oscar nominations, but I recommend that you go see it. I'm actually looking forward to seeing it again because when I saw it initially back in November, it was on a screener and I watched it at home. And I said then, after seeing it, who is Fernanda Torres? Oh my God, what a performance. It was up there. I actually did a video about a month ago or so. It's on the channel for my favorite performances of 2024, and she was in my top 5. I feel like it is one of the more powerful, impactful, emotional, just gut-wrenching, real performances that we got this year. And she did something truly, truly special in this movie. And I'm so happy to see her get not only the Globe win, but the Oscar nomination. And I will say I'm going to be doing my power rankings in just a minute. I think I'm Still Here has a long hill to climb to be anywhere close to receiving the Best Picture trophy. But I will also tell you that the international voting body is a lot bigger than it used to be. And Emilia Perez is also international. But is that international vote going to split a little bit when you look at international feature? I haven't done these predictions yet, but I could see myself predicting I'm Still Here to beat Emilia Perez in international. Stay tuned. But it's my number 4, and I think you should see it. These last 3 movies I'm going to mention, like I said, fell into my top 7 movies of the year, period, across any genre, having nothing to do with the Oscars when I did that list. My number 3 is the most crazy fucking thing you will see from 2024's cinematic experience. I'm talking about Coralie Farjat's The Substance. I am a horror guy, as you can probably tell behind me, or if you follow my channel for any period of time. I love horror. It's my favorite genre of film. And what's crazy about me saying that on an Oscars video, which is probably my second favorite thing in the world as award season, is they're together this year. When you look at a movie like Nosferatu, which got 4 below-the-line craft nominations and was, a lot of people thought, maybe possible a sleeper for Best Picture, but of course I'm Still Here took that this year. And then you look at a movie like Alien Romulus, which got a couple below-the-line tech categories, and then The Substance, which outperformed with 5 nominations this year, including Best Director, Best Actress for Demi Moore, and Best Picture. It's my number 3 out of the 10 that got nominated. I mean, yes, it's a great movie that I loved, but it's carrying the torch for the horror genre at the Oscars this year. Like I said, overperforming. It's also the most memorable, bonkers, off-the-wall, crazy shit you will see at the cinema. Coralie Farjat really reinvents kind of our perception of body horror in this film because she adds a layer to it. It's not just for the shock factor. It's not just for the cringe factor, which you do get in spades, especially in the last act of the film, but it's also got a story to tell. It's got a commentary there. We've been talking about that with a couple of these movies. There's a commentary in The Substance, too, about how women are expected to be in society, especially in the public eye, on TV, in movies, etc., essentially in Hollywood. And Demi Moore's own narrative as an actress who's been doing it for 45 years, versus her character of Elizabeth Sparkle in the movie, makes it a very personal, intimate attachment to the film for her. And that comes through. And then you get such sturdy work from Margaret Qualley in this film. who just brilliantly plays off of Demi Moore. I mentioned the duo of Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo earlier. I also think a case could be made here for Moore and Qualley as one of the best on-screen duos in The Substance. But this movie is essentially a pop art bloodbath that you won't believe some of the shit that happens in this movie, some of the stuff that the swings that the filmmaker takes, and frankly the actors as well. But it's an enjoyable watch that, like I said, is not shallow. It comes with its own gravitas and its own meaning. I love this movie so much. The Substance is not going to be for everyone, and I am putting a warning on it if you're going through these Best Picture nominees and you want to watch as many as you can. A lot of people do that. Just be warned. It is not for the weak stomach. Just know that it's all practical effects. It's not real, guys. It can't hurt you. The Substance is my number 3. My number 2 and my number 1, you could see as a 1A and a 1B situation. I love them both so much. I'm giving you my personal rankings. I didn't really know what to put at number 1. But I'll tell you why I chose what I chose when we get there. But first, my runner-up, my number 2 among the Best Picture nominees this year is Sean Baker's Anora. Anora is a film that I have categorized as Pretty Woman meets Uncut Gems. I think Sean Baker is back to top form here, as I was not a huge fan of his previous film, Red Rocket. Even though I love some of his other projects, like The Florida Project and Tangerine, I wasn't as big on Red Rocket. So when he came back to the Baker that I love with Anora, I was thrilled. But he does such a good job, and of course Mikey Madison and others in the film as well, of making this kind of a romantic comedy in the first half. It's kind of cute, and oh my God, like this is such a cool little love story. And then near the halfway point, it really turns into this anxiety-fueled, like almost like a chase movie. It's very heavy-handed in the stress that it gives to the audience members. And the reason it works is because of Mikey Madison as Anora, or Annie in the film. She sells everything that she's going through. She sells the kind of meaningful, compact arc that her character goes through. Because, somebody commented on one of my previous videos how I would love for her to win the Academy Award. They said that Annie in the film doesn't have an arc. And while I agree with that to a certain extent, what I think her arc is in the film is the life experiences that she gets in like a week, because the film really takes place over the course of a week. So in 7 days, she experiences more than most people experience in their entire lives, and what she has to go through, and the ups and downs, the marriage, the annulment, the just finding out different things that you thought you knew, but your expectations being kind of blown out of the water, and how she has to kind of decide what's best for her in her situation, and seeing that happen in real time, the way Baker films it, you feel like you're there with her, experiencing it as she does. It's a film that, along with the cinematography and the score and the screenplay and the songs that were chosen for the needle drops in the film, which I also love. A lot of the supporting performances. Yuri Borisov got nominated for supporting actor this year. Such a subtle, quiet, tender, truly supporting role in this film to Annie, our main character. I'm so glad he got nominated. I mean, what a great nomination for not having that flashy outburst that a lot of these nominees will have. His is more just facial expressions, frankly, and he got nominated for it, which I think is great. At the end of the day, I think Anora is a movie that will go down as a film that will help mark 2024 in cinema. I think it's one of those movies that will be synonymous with its year. We do movie drafts on my podcast, and I think when 2024 comes around, I would be drafting Anora very highly, because I think it's a film that's going to attach itself to the time that it came out. And even though I think Demi Moore has the narrative and has really everything she needs to win the Oscar, I would love to see somebody like Mikey Madison surprise on Oscars night, because a lot of times these young actors will get overlooked they'll have their chance in the future. And that may be the case with Mikey, because she is a phenomenal actress. But I don't know how she can top herself in Anora. It was such a brilliant, brilliant performance. And everything else that went into it too. It is my runner-up, my number 2 among the nominees this year. So my number 1 movie of the films that got nominated this year, if you've been keeping up at home, there's only one left that I have not mentioned. The reason I decided to put this as my number 1 as opposed to Anora, because they're basically tied for me, is because What happened, Academy? Dune Part 2 is my number one film of the year, and I think is easily among the best films that came out in 2024. Not just that got nominated, but period. Now look, Dune is an elaborate story based on, frankly, an acid trip that considers itself a book series. But this is very dense material, right? Very difficult to kind of translate to a general audience. Denis Villeneuve did that. Okay, of course, the screenplay and the actors and everything else that goes involved too. But I don't see how he didn't get nominated for director for either of the films. Like we were talking about Edward Berger earlier with All Quiet to Conclave. The Academy did the same damn thing to Denis with Dune Part 1 and now Dune 2. And I know Dune Messiah or Part 3 is going to be coming in a couple years. So maybe they're doing the Lord of the Rings thing. Like, oh, we'll get Denis. I think that's horseshit. This guy should have been nominated, frankly, both of them. But since he didn't get Part 1, he should definitely have been nominated this year for Part 2. I mean, he didn't even get a DGA nomination. He didn't get a BAFTA nomination. I mean, it's just absolutely unfathomable to me that he is not being recognized more by peers of actual directors for what he did. Because I would think, and I've actually heard directors say this, I quoted Steven Spielberg, guys, James Cameron, Christopher Nolan on my podcast when we talked about this movie, because those filmmakers and several others have said that they just couldn't believe it when they saw it. And these are guys that make movies for a living and have been for decades. I would think directors or people in Hollywood that work in film would go to IMAX or whatever and would see Dune Part 2 on the screen and would literally not even know how that was made. Like, they would be so baffled by the spectacle and the just grand scale of this production. And Denis Villeneuve, to take such dense material and make it so palatable and beautiful. I mean, this is a beautifully shot, beautifully acted, sounds beautiful. Hans Zimmer got left out because of some weird rule, yet Wicked got nominated for original score. My head hurts. Nonetheless, I'm going to get on a soapbox if I don't stop myself. Dune Part 2, I think, is the most well-made movie of the year. It's not going to connect with everybody because of the source material and because of the complexity of the story and the characters. You know, it's going to be similar to like Star Wars. If you start from the beginning, you're going to have a lot to learn. Or Game of Thrones, there's like 50 characters that I still don't know their names. It was this person's cousin and they fought this dragon. I don't know. Like, I get that. But if you can get past that kind of the lore aspect of it and look at it for what it is from a cinematic perspective, nothing was made on a higher level this year, in my opinion, than Dune Part 2. It is this year's Oppenheimer, in my opinion. If you're thinking about last year, I would equate it to that from the craft of filmmaking itself and everything that went into it. I also think it's a travesty that Dune Part 2 only got, I think, 4 or 5 nominations. Luckily, one of them was Best Picture. I'm going to give you my power rankings in just a second. It doesn't really stand a chance to win because it missed out on too many of those other categories that it really needed to be in consideration for Best Picture. But for my money, my personal rankings, I understand not everybody's going to love it, but these are my personal choices. I love these movies. I cannot wait for Messiah. And Denis has now become probably one of my favorite top 5 filmmakers because of these Dune films. And what they do to me when I see them on the screen, I'm just literally like, I love movies while I'm watching it, you know, and not a lot of other films made me feel that way in 2024. It's my number one of the movies nominated this year. All right, guys, I want to know what you thought of my rankings of these films. So make sure you hit me down below in the comments. I'm sure I pissed a lot of you off, especially if you're a fan of Emilia Perez. I'm so sorry. But really, like I said, I do love this lot of films, with the exception of Emilia Perez. The other 9 movies I'm actually a fan of. And like I said, the top 4 that I gave you were in my top 12 of the year personally. What I'm going to do now, and this is going to be a separate video series that I'm probably going to do once a week or maybe every other week leading up to the week of the Oscars, is I'll give you my power rankings. And that, of course, may change as the award season goes on, because Critics' Choice are going to give out their awards. SAG is going to give out their awards. BAFTAs are going to be handed out. And there's going to be some other award circles mentioned in that period of time as well. The Film Independent Spirit Awards, etc. So the rankings may change. But this is not my personal ranking. This is who I think is going to win the categories. And then when we get to the week of the Oscars, I'm a psycho. I did this last year. I do like an hour or an hour and a half video where I give you my final winning predictions on one video. And there you go, which is basically going to mirror my power rankings. Of course, I'm not going to do the power rankings for every category, though. Let's start with the best picture power rankings. This is as they stand right now, in my opinion. Good God, help us. Please, I need Ray Fine and the Conclave or something, because I have Amelia Perez as the number one most likely to win Best Picture. Good God, what do I do? Look, 13 nominations speaks for itself. Now, that, of course, that doesn't always pan out. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button by David Fincher received 13 nominations. I think it only won 2 below-the-line categories. And there's a couple other instances where it has occurred that a multiple nominated film doesn't walk away with the prize. However, from a percentage perspective, it happens more often than not. If you are the nomination leader, you win the prize. Another one where it didn't happen recently was The Power of the Dog. I think that one got 12 nominations and didn't win. I don't think it won any. It may have won 1. I didn't fact check that before the recording. But a lot of times, your nomination count leader will be your best picture. Now, it's going to come down to what does it win before the picture is announced, or what does it win on the circuit before voting ends for the Academy. So this is the initial power ranking. None of that stuff's happened yet. But the 13 nominations, even though I frankly hate the movie, I would be dumb to not put this at number 1 based on the obviousness of how much the Academy loved Amelia Perez and based on that international influence that I've already talked about, which is going to play heavily into the voting. And the ranked voting, I think, as unfortunate as it may be, is probably going to help a film like Amelia Perez. I hope this changes, guys, but right now I have it number 1 in my power rankings, which would drop The Brutalist down to number 2. But I think The Brutalist is surefire competition for Amelia Perez. Honestly, it's probably one of those 2 movies that wins this year. It's just a matter of which one am I going to predict in the few days before the Oscars. If the Oscars were happening in a few days from now, it would be Amelia Perez, but check on me in a month. First of all, check and see if I'm okay if I still have Amelia Perez at number 1. The Brutalist is 2. At number 3, I have Anora, no change. Anora has a path, whereas really a lot of the other ones below it here, their path is a little more gravelly. Anora has a path, but would need to do some stuff on the circuit. It would need to win SAG, possibly DGA, PGA. Mikey Madison needs to start winning some awards, televised awards, over Demi Moore. If that stuff happens, Anora becomes a much more brighter light in this race. But Anora did get the editing nom, and it did get the director nom for Sean Baker, as well as screenplay. That's the trifecta if you're looking at a Best Picture winner. In my opinion, the top 3 here, Amelia, The Brutalist, and Anora, all have those major nominations that I just mentioned. They usually need the wins, but I'm saying at least they're starting in the right place because they have editing, they have screenplay, and they have, obviously, director for those 3 as well. Conclave would be my 4 right now. The big reason why that dropped from 2 to 4 for me, and Brutalist was my number 1 initially, by the way, but the reason Conclave dropped down to 4 is because Edward Berger missed. I mean, honestly, if Edward Berger had gotten a director nomination, honestly, Conclave would probably be my number 1 right now, because if not Amelia Perez, because it would be so strong. It got 8 nominations. That would have been 9 if it had gotten a director. So, but it's number 4 right now. There is still a shot, a la Spotlight, if you guys know Oscar history. It does happen without the director nom, but it is extremely rare, and I think it sets up Conclave for a long road ahead if they're trying to get that Best Picture win. Number 5, I left Wicked alone. Wicked got 10 nominations, so much like the logic I had with Amelia Perez and The Brutalist, it just got so many nominations. They love it. And where I'm hopeful, honestly, that Wicked could overperform in the voting is if you have your musical lovers and people that want to vote for musicals because they have a background in theater, or they just are prone to like that stuff more or whatever. Maybe it'll be Wicked versus Amelia Perez for them, and I don't see how any sane mind Wicked couldn't win that battle. Of course, I've been proven wrong so far this award season, but I'm hopeful that maybe Wicked would get some of those musical preferential ballots. I've already told you how much I love A Complete Unknown, and look, I raised it up to 6, although I think it was like 8 or 9 for me initially. It's surging. It is surging at the right time. It is on a coattail of momentum at the right time. It also got 8 nominations. I think a lot of people I listened to were predicting maybe 5 or 6, but Mangold got in for director. He also stands a chance to win at the DGA leading up to the Oscars. And Monica Barbaro is a perfect example. They love this movie. Costume design, a lot of kind of weird shit that I had in my predictions, but most people think it's kind of surprising. And I guess it is if you look at the costumes that it was up against. But I think A Complete Unknown is literally climbing. Right now it's number 6, but it's literally like one of those movies that every week something could happen to bump it up a notch or two. And the next thing you know, it could be in the top 3 battling for Best Picture. Look out for A Complete Unknown. And I know that's going to make a lot of cinephiles or, film Twitter, Letterboxd people upset, but A Complete Unknown is a movie that traditionally, without that international influence that we currently have, traditionally the Academy would have rained down on. So how much of that kind of establishment is still left over that could go towards this movie? They love Mangold. If Timothy wins Best Actor, forget it. I think we're on our way to A Complete Unknown doing something that a lot of people, as we're sitting here right now, don't expect. I've got it at number 6 in the power rankings. I left The Substance alone at number 7. Frankly, I just think that movie's too weird. I know it has the directing nom. It didn't get in for editing, I don't think, which really surprised me. I don't think. It did get in for effects and makeup. It has a chance. It just really depends on, and this is not something you can gauge when I'm doing these power rankings, but it really just depends on how weird or how different the Academy wants to be. Do they want to just like The Substance checkmark everything because they want to show that they're a new body? Then maybe it overperforms. But if I'm being a little more logical, I just think this film is too fucking strange and too out there that if they watch it, which hopefully they do before they vote, I don't know how many votes it's going to get. I just feel like it's too much of a weird, strange watch that's not going to speak to 60-year-old white dudes that live in the hills. I'm Still Here. Man, that's another one that could keep rising. I just moved it up from 10 to 8 in this initial power ranking. Dune Part 2 suffered because of that, but I don't think Dune Part 2 or frankly Nickel Boys stand a chance. The funny thing about my predictions and what make this season so exciting is, in my opinion, the screen you're looking at here, from number 8 to number 1, in my opinion, any of those movies could win Best Picture like a month and a half from now. Any of them could. They all have a path to do that. For some, it's, this movie's going to have to lose this, and this person, kind of like the NFL playoffs, X number of teams have to lose for you to get in and all that stuff. It's going to kind of be like that for a lot of these movies, but they all have a path, whereas unfortunately, I think Dune Part 2 and Nickel Boys just don't have a path. I don't see, frankly, I'd be fine with either one of those winning, especially Dune, but I just don't see it happening. Whereas from I'm Still Here all the way up to Amelia Perez, which I have at 1, any of those could frankly win. I also think I'm Still Here has a huge shot, and like I said earlier, I'm probably going to predict it to win International Feature over Amelia Perez. Now, if Amelia Perez loses International Feature to I'm Still Here, would it win Best Picture? You don't think so, right? So then you're looking at a clear path, a green light for a movie like The Brutalist or Anora, or maybe even I'm Still Here, if all of that international vote went to them versus Amelia Perez. But I do fear that in Best Picture, that international vote may be split a little bit, and as much as I'm dumbfounded by it, they seem like they like Amelia Perez, so that's still going to get some votes in that preferential ranking system. So I hope I'm Still Here keeps climbing. I've already bumped it up a couple spots, and this is my first video. I think it may continue to rise, much like A Complete Unknown. Another huge obstacle that I'm Still Here is going to have, and particularly Fernanda Torres, is that she's not nominated anywhere else on the circuit after the Globes. The Globes already happened and she won, which is great. She had that stage time, but now we're not going to see her the rest of award season. People like me will, but the general public's not going to see her. The Academy voters aren't going to see her making acceptance speeches. Now, if she's smart and if her campaign's smart, she'll be out there doing interviews and going on TV shows and all that kind of stuff, which will go a long way. But it's going to be different. Like Demi Moore's on stage every week, giving a great speech. They're going to see that. And Fernanda Torres, unfortunately, may be forgotten by the time voting ends. Obviously, I hope that's not the case. But it's a huge obstacle for this movie. I think I'm Still Here's best shot is to upset an international feature, and I hope that it does. And then I already mentioned Dune Part 2 and Nickel Boys. No chance. We'll see if anything crazy happens on the circuit. Nickel Boys is, nominated in a couple prestigious award shows. I don't see it happening for those films unless that narrative starts to kind of change a little bit. They'll probably remain like my bottom two unless something crazy happens. Those are my initial Best Picture power rankings. Like I said, I'm going to do this for you at least every couple weeks, and I will also keep it updated on my website even more frequently if you want to find that link below. What do you think stands the best chance to win the Best Picture Academy Award this year? Please comment, especially if it's not Amelia Perez. Slap me upside the head virtually, but that's what I've got right now. Why did they nominate this thing 13 times? I'll see you guys out here next time in the garage.